All right, welcome to episode 4 of The Riser. I'm Greg Strong, the Canadian Press, along with Ted Wyman, the Winnipeg Sun and Postmedia. Ted, how are you?
I'm fantastic, my friend. In 2 days, I'm going to be going to Mexico, and it's pretty hard to not be happy right now because no more Manitoba winter, at least for a couple of weeks.
How sweet it is. It's good to be Teddy. And it's also, I got to say, I'm very excited to have Cathal Kelly as our guest from the Globe and Mail. He's a longtime sports columnist and also an author, and he'll be joining us shortly. Ted, an exciting weekend of sports. I was flipping through the dial on Saturday night, and it was just, anything and everything: curling, hockey, NFL football. It's a great time of year to be a sports fan. What stood out to you when you think back on the past couple days?
Man, you're right on Saturday. It was Hockey Day in Canada. There was games all day long. There was the Grand Slam of curling going on. There was NFL games all over the place. It was really exciting. But did you catch the Buffalo Bills Kansas City game on Sunday night? That one really did catch my eye. I'm sure it did for a lot of people in your part of the world. The center of the universe likes their Buffalo Bills, I know, but it was wild. I mean, honestly, the game is one thing. Patrick Mahomes has been to the AFC Championship every year that he's been in the NFL. It's insane. The Chiefs are off to the AFC Championship again. It's hard to believe, and the poor Bills and the poor Bills fans, they lose again on a kick that goes wide right. I mean, can you believe that? But really, the star of that whole show to me was Jason Kelsey. He wasn't even in the game. He's Travis Kelsey's brother. He's up in a luxury suite with Taylor Swift and a whole bunch of other people. And he's crushing beers. He's got his tarp off. He's jumping out in the stands and celebrating with the fans, even though I think they were cheering for the other team than he was. And it was absolutely hilarious to watch. Like, what a man of the people, I got to tell you. And who makes a cameo but Winnipeg Blue Bombers quarterback Zach Collaros, who happened to be roommates with Travis Kelsey and Jason Kelsey back in college. So there he is, sitting in a suite with Taylor Swift and Jason Kelsey watching the game. A lot of people in Winnipeg like that one.
But plenty of great content in the Winnipeg Sun. I'm sure you gave that a good run. Nice kicker story there. Let's swing into Cahall's moment here. We've got about 15 minutes with Cahal, we're hoping, and I've got a little intro here that Teddy fashioned. It's just great. I'm going to read a few lines and then add a couple lines myself. So yeah, sports columnist and author Cathal Kelly, known for his wit and storytelling in covering some of the biggest events in the world over the last 20 years. Cathal also won the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor in 2019 for his childhood memoir, Boy Wonders. Now, Ted, you know how some guitarists just have their own sound. I'm thinking Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine, Neil Young, Jimi Hendrix. In my opinion, Cathal has his own writing style that few, if any, in the sports columnist world can match. Cathal, welcome to The Riser.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you very much, Greg. Wow, that's a lot. Tom Morello, come on. It's a Tom Morello reference. I thought, if you said Hendrix or something, I would have been like, but Tom Morello, that's incredible. Thank you.
I'm popping your tires here, and I wanted to start with a question right out of the gate. I read Boy Wonders. Now, refresh my memory. I believe you spent some time working in a bookstore as a youngster. Can you tell us about your love of reading? Obviously, dozens of books behind you there, and how books helped shape your path to becoming a national sports columnist.
Oh, that's an interesting. Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do. I would say that's my purpose in life. If I had one professionally, it's not to write, it's to read. Yeah, I did work in a bookstore through university. So I spent a lot of time reading and a lot of time ignoring customers. That's a minimum wage job. That's a tough job. That's a lot of schlepping books. It's not as sexy as they make it look in the movies. But yeah, the reading, I think, prepares you. Obviously I get asked a lot, as I'm sure the both of you do, about how you get into this work and what you should do and how you prepare yourself. And mostly I say, don't. It's a terrible idea. Become an engineer instead, then you'll actually have a job. But if you're determined to do this kind of work, I think practice writing, and that's the other thing that drives me nuts when people say you become a writer by writing. I don't think that's true at all. I think you learn the craft of it, especially for sports writing, because there is a lot of specialized skill involved in covering a game, writing a buzzer beater. But if you want to actually understand writing, you have to read. So read as much as you can. And essentially what you do is, I think a writing style isn't something you develop yourself. It's something you rip off uh, other better writers. Like, I mean, uh, obviously a lot of novelists, but when I think of sports writing in particular, I was thinking of this a lot this week because of Sports Illustrated. And I don't know about you guys, but that was such an important part of my teenage years, getting those magazines through the slot, reading them on the porch, wouldn't even go inside. Frank DeFord, Rick Riley, Gary Smith, Lee Montville, like just incredible, incredible writers. And it was the reading that prepared me to do it. I didn't realize it at the time. I had no goal to be a sports writer, but those guys, and they were mostly guys, prepared me to do this work.
Man, you ripped the next question right out of my mouth because I wanted to talk to you about Sports Illustrated. That's a crazy thing that just happened. It's been a pretty big decline for what was once, I think, the absolute pinnacle of sports writing that I would get every week and read many of the writers that you've already talked about. And it's just it went downhill to becoming a more watered down online version in a lot of ways. They had an AI scandal, and then now we've been told that every single person that works there has been laid off. And I don't think they've exactly said what their future is, but it sure doesn't sound good. How devastating is that, just for our industry in general, when you think about something that was just so high up there and now we don't have that. And I'm going to throw one thing in. It's a bit of an opinion from me, but like the world is becoming more in sports is becoming so much about Pat McAfee and people like that was sort of a shock jock style of sports. And we're losing that craft of it that was so evident in the pages of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always the issue of aging yourself out when you start talking about this stuff, because back in the good old days, I'm sure that people were reading Sports Illustrated in the '80s and were thinking, some people like us thinking, oh God, I remember when sports writing was really great in the '50s. But yeah, it is quite sad. Like I went back into a bit of a Sports Illustrated wormhole to read some of my favorite pieces, and one of them is a Gary Smith profile of Mike Tyson. And then I started reading profiles of Gary Smith. Like Gary Smith, back in the day, can you imagine this? Like, it's just the industry has changed so much. He had so much money. He was allowed to live anywhere he liked. And his contract with Sports Illustrated for the entirety of his 30 years there was he wrote 4 times a year. So he's paid massive money to write 4 pieces a year. And that was considered a good deal for Sports Illustrated to have such a great writer write these, 15, 20,000 word profiles. And the access they got, that's the other thing that drives me crazy. Like, you read those pieces, nobody gets this access anymore. Like, it's all mitigated through PR staff. The moments, the idea of going for a coffee or a beer with an athlete now, unless they're playing tiddlywinks, it's just laughable. Like, it would never, ever, ever happen. And so it's harder to write those human stories. Yeah, I get quite wistful about it, because that was written in a way that allowed you to, they were the last word on everything. I miss that last word. Now, sports journalism and all journalism, but sports journalism especially, is so right now. What am I thinking right now? What is the idea right now? And, it used to be that if somebody won the Super Bowl, fine, you'd seen the game and you read the paper the next day, but the Super Bowl didn't end for you until 5 days later when you got Sports Illustrated. And then you got the real story. I mean, I miss that slow pace and an agreed upon Bible of sports. We don't have anything like that anymore. But that's just me being. That's me being I realize I have become, like when you said earlier, like long time columnist. It's true. Like, I am now a dinosaur of my own time.
As sad as the decline in access has been, guys, often we do get the chance to write what we see, sometimes on the way to the game, sometimes on the way back, sometimes when we're in a host city somewhere. And I'm reminded, Cathal, when I think back to your writing at the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, some of the more interesting pieces I thought were some of the bus station interactions you had, or hopping on a media bus and looking at the Brazilian countryside, things like that. When you think back to that time, Cathal, what jumped out at you from your travels in that country covering that event?
Oh, I mean, there's a million things, but I mean, this is the way I've always tried to approach it. Uh, I can't explain sports to people. Like we work in the one branch of journalism, I think it's fair to say, where the people who read our stuff know as much as us. Maybe they may not have the same kind of access. They may not watch as much as us because we're paid to do it. They have actual lives and they're too busy to watch, the same team every night. But they probably know about as much as us about what's going on. So it's difficult to write with that kind of in this, you're explaining things to people. Like, there's not much point in me going to Brazil and like explaining a soccer game. I mean, you saw it, I saw it. Like, I don't have any sort of inside dope that you don't have about what happened and why. So when I go to these places, the thing I think I try to write is if you were here, what's it like to be here? I think that's what people are interested in. Like, what's it like to be there? What does it look like? How are the people? Like, so those are the stories. Like, bus stations fascinate me. Anywhere people congregate, big crowds, favelas there. And I realize I'm skimming the surface. Like, I have no, and I try to be forthright about that in the writing. I'm not giving you a final word on anything. I'm just giving you a complete tourist's view of something and try to make it a bit fun. That World Cup, I mean, that was another World Cup that was supposed to be a complete disaster because nobody in Brazil wanted it. Like, just about every World Cup, the people there hate it. I remember at the opening game, they were rioting outside. They were rioting outside the stadium for the opening game. Uh, but people, the allure of those big games is, I mean, the people who run the Olympics and the World Cup, that's what they understand. Is they understand people will be enraged because you've ripped them off, you've cost too much, they've gone bankrupt. But once it starts, it just sucks everybody in. They can't help themselves. You guys have covered enough of these big things to know people never stay mad. Like, day one or day two, they might be mad. By day three, they're just totally in it.
I can't help but wonder, Cathal, what your thoughts are then on how it was to cover the Olympics in Beijing in that crazy bubble. I mean, all three of us were there. For people who don't know, we had to take buses from our hotels out through a locked gate, through the streets of Beijing into another locked gate, and then had to take buses from venue to venue. You were never allowed to even walk from one venue to another. It was a complete bubble, and obviously it was due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But when you talk about telling those stories in Brazil, being the bus stations and the people, it's pretty hard to do that in a situation like we had in Beijing, wasn't it?
It was incredibly difficult. That was such a dispiriting Olympics because there was no atmosphere. Everybody seemed, I mean, the volunteers were great. They're always great. They're kids, which is why they're great. But then you start thinking about the fact, like, why isn't the guy working in the hotel restaurant? Why doesn't he look like he's having fun? Well, because they locked him into the bubble 8 weeks before I got here, and he'll be here 8 weeks after I got here. Like, he's stuck here for essentially, I think we worked it out. Those people were there for 5 months. They were in the bubble by themselves, living in shipping containers. While we were staying in 3, 4, 5-star hotels. I mean, that to me was the most bizarre event. I don't know about you guys, but the most bizarre thing I've ever covered. Um, I lived in total fear of testing positive for COVID some morning and then just being disappeared. Um, but in its way, fascinating. Like, my favorite bit, I remember that. Do you remember they used to take, when you went a great distance to a venue, they would take you still on a city bus and they would pack up the city bus so that you were standing, like, strap hanging. And then they would get on a highway and they would go about 120, 130 kilometers an hour. And then I remember that they had put out a thing that said all the residents of Beijing, they were so worried about this quarantine. All the residents of Beijing were told, if you come across one of these buses crashed and people are spread out on the ground, don't come near them. Don't help them. They might have COVID. So I thought, like, even if we get into a fender bender in this thing, we're going to be going out the front windshield like Tomahawk missiles. And if I happen to survive that, I will then die on the pavement because no one is coming to help me. It was a weird. Like, what was Greg, have you had occasion yet to tell your famous Pyeongchang up the mountain story?
Oh, not on this podcast, but that's a beauty. Yeah.
That deserves its own podcast, that story. Like, I mean, those are the moments. Like, that's the thing about being a sports writer, and you guys know you can't get them all into your copy, but you don't, like, people's like, what was it like to be there when so and so scored the goal? And occasionally that's true. that you have those moments and they really stick in your mind. But for the however many thousands of games of all different sports I've seen, I can remember like five. Like, and people will have to remind me I was there. But the stories I remember are things that happened in the bar, on the bus, some stupid thing one of my beloved colleagues has done. Those are the stories that stick with me. Those are the stories we tell. When sports writers get together, they don't tell sports stories. They tell sports writer stories. So
For those wondering, I went on a hike across the road from our
no,
village
you
in the
can't. No,
mountains.
you need way more of a setup. You
Yeah,
need to
I'll
devote
just
like 15 minutes to this. You can't just rip this off in like 2 minutes. It's too good a story.
I went off the beaten path and I was escorted back. That's all I'll say.
Yeah,
We'll, we'll,
it's
we'll save it for later on. It was a beauty though.
mm.
Cathal, my next question. I mean, obviously, sometimes in the gamer slash column business, you have to be a little bit critical of the athletes of the teams. I'm wondering, and I can only imagine what that's like for a columnist. When you're going into the locker room the next day or later that week, after writing about players, teams, executives, have you ever had any challenges in those locker rooms in the days that followed?
I've had, I've been in this now for 16 years. It was more at the beginning. It's weird. I think they've figured out, or at least they're told by agents or PR staff on their own teams. I don't know about you guys. I used to get a lot more when I covered it in the beginning that I would have angry confrontations with people. And it was always, almost always, at least like sometimes it is true. I said this terrible thing about you. And they get very angry. Often it was like broken telephone, like, their wife read it or their agent read it and then said something to them about it. And they kind of misinterpreted what was said. And then they come up to you and they're really angry. I had a couple of real like angry run-ins with the Jays pitcher, AJ Burnett, who I actually quite liked, but if he was upset with you, like he had no filter. Like it was just like screaming. Um, he was a bit unhinged, but in a way I kind of enjoyed. Jose Bautista I had some issues with. He was another one. He wasn't unhinged, but like, he would, if he was upset, you knew he was upset. Um, but yeah, for the most part, you hear about it later, maybe. I don't think they want to give you the satisfaction anymore. I think that's it. I don't know about you guys. I don't think they want to give you the satisfaction. So even if they're angry, and though I do often get caught, like when you talk to someone, usually at the more coach executive level, and they'll say, of course, they're like, they always have the same pattern. Uh, I want you to write what you're going to write. I understand you have a job to do. I don't take it personally. And the truth is, they always say this, truth is, I don't read it. I don't read anything. I had one executive say, I read everything, but I read it 2 weeks after it's printed. And I was trying to think, how does that exactly work? Like you have your 2 week, but anyway, they go, I don't read it. Honestly, I don't read it. And then the conversation will go on 10 minutes and they forget themselves. And then they say, but remember when you said, you remember when you wrote, and you're like, well, like obviously you have a very good secretary or something who's really keeping you abreast of stuff, or you're reading. They all read it. They all read it. The smart ones see it as, or the ones who want to stay sane, I think, see it as a bit of a game. They understand. As long as it's not personal, like as long as you're not taking really personal shots, which I don't do, as long as you don't mention their families, which I would never do, um, they understand it's all part of it. The professionals.
This is fantastic insight, Cathal. I would think we'd be remiss not to ask you a bit about some current events in the sports world and get your take. Maybe who knows? People will be mad at you for what you say now. I'm not sure, but the Raptors and Leafs in particular interest me. From where I sit, it's kind of an unbelievable situation with the Raptors right now because when you think about it, I was driving past the McDonald's locally here yesterday, and there's a big sign out front about the Siakam swirl that they're promoting, right? Well, he's not even with the Raptors anymore. Nobody is. And I saw someone on Twitter today say, they've gutted my team, and with it, all my love and loyalty to the team. I wish them well, but I'm done. So that's a little dramatic, but I'm just wondering what you think the climate is for a Raptors fan right now.
I can't. The team has made I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in any of these, but to me, they've made some questionable choices about whether they thought they had the team for right now, or the team, or whether it was a tear down or a semi rebuild, or they were just taking the roof off, but they're going to maybe change the windows, but they're going to leave the floors. I'm not sure they knew. The thing about it is, the way I always think about the Raptors and the Leafs is that there's two things happening there. There's the sports team and the business. The business in both instances is massively successful, hugely successful. And one of the rare instances in pro sport where ownership controls broadcast, they control most of the media. Not to say that they are telling the media what to say, but they're a one-stop shop. Like, they're horizontally integrated. They've got it all. It is, MLSE might be, the finest sports business in North America. Certainly not the biggest, but in terms of efficiencies, it's way ahead of the game. And then everybody knows, like, transplant it to your own life. Like, if you have the kind of job where everything is going great and money's being made and no one's on your back, and ownership is like, your boss is like, just, as long as the work gets done at the end of the day, I don't care how you do it. You're not exactly going to kill yourself, are you? This is not to say they don't want to win. It's not to say that anybody thinks that losing is okay. Absolutely not. But you're not going to take any wild swings, are you, if you run those teams? Because why would you? That's the only way you put your job in jeopardy, is when you do something wild. So why not just keep re-signing the same guys? Or why not just sit around and watch the team, in the right case of the Raptors, dissipate to nothingness? Because you're going to get more chances. Everything can happen slowly. That's how you explain it to yourself, I'm sure, is you say to yourself, it's not that I'm not making change, it's just I don't want to be rash. So what the New York Yankees might have to do in 6 months, because everybody might get fired, or Real Madrid or Barcelona, I'm going to do in 6 years. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll try the next 6 years. That's, I think, the story of those franchises.
Thank you.
Our last one, Cathal. I wanted to let folks know that in 2020, you were nominated for a National Newspaper Award, in part for your coverage of the Tim Hortons Brier, as it was known at that time. Now, we weren't going to talk about curling in this interview hit, but I was curious, when you first, I believe it was your first Brier, when you went to Kingston that year, what were your expectations and what were your takeaways now that you've had a few years to think?
Well, it's hard to think about that one, because that was really pre-COVID. Remember this? That was days before COVID. I remember on the way home, I stopped at a Freshco and bought like $500 worth of canned goods on the way home. I think it was in Kingston. Yeah. Like I literally filled the car with tuna on the way home, which, as it turned out, was idiotic, but whatever. What was my take of that Brier? It was, you're so amped for it because you're told, even if you don't know anything about curling, which is me, you understand what it means. The Brier means something to you. It was even better. What I couldn't get over was the atmosphere of relaxation. Like, I get that it's a very high quality sports tournament, but guys are just rolling off the field of play and leaning over the barrier and very happy to talk. Average people. It took me back, you keep hearing about this bygone time when athletes were average people and had to go work on farms in the summer, the Bobby Orr, Bobby Hull myths. I've never seen it, but this was the closest I ever got. They were regular people. They were funny. They were guileless. I just loved them. I loved covering it. Because most of those, they're so guarded. They're afraid of you. They should be. Like, they're quite right to be. They're afraid of saying something stupid because they can end it all now. Like, they live in a really weird world where if one ill-judged comment that's caught on camera can end a career, or certainly, hobble a career to the point where it never recovers. So it made me think that I realize they're not amateurs, but that spirit of amateurism, I'd love to cover more sports like that.
Well, plus you got to hang out with Greg and I.
Of course, that was the real highlight.
On the Media Riser. Maybe a couple of pops out on the town as well. I have just one more, and I know we got to let you go, Cathal, but this one I think you're going to like. I ran into Fred Degg, who's a Canadian press reporter in Montreal, and he was talking about our favorite bar in Sochi, bar number
Oh,
4.
number 4. Yeah.
A bartender was very friendly with us, and
Yeah.
he is among those who's convinced that our bartender was a KGB agent. So I've at one time had this discussion with you. Do you believe that our bartender was a KGB agent?
Our bartender Ruslan, remember he was Ruslan. Yes, I like KGB agent. Like I think he was a cop. I think he was a cop of some sort because he told us some ridiculous story at the beginning. He was like Rob Longley from The Sun, Rob Longley's best friend at one point. And he told a story about how he came from a small village, but his English was idiomatically perfect, like excellent, excellent English. And we asked him, how is your English so wonderful? And he said, oh, I learned it from the TV. And we're like, okay. And then one night while we were all in there, booze and booze and booze and like blind drunk at 4 a.m, a bunch of maybe Freddie was one of them, a bunch of Quebec journalists burst through the door and began shouting in French. And he started talking to them in French. So what were these French movies that taught him perfect French as well as perfect English? You remember the thing with the mittens, him and the mittens? Do you remember that story?
Yeah, tell that story. Come on.
I wasn't very far. Well, one of the big things at that Olympics, the really big hot item at that Olympics was a Team Canada toque, those Hudson Bay toques. They were huge, and of course you couldn't find them. The only people who brought them, there was no such thing as a like a merchandise. There was no store selling Canada merch, so the only people who had them were the athletes and the athletes' families. And he came to us one night, Ruslan, and said, as we were sitting around a huge table, and said, can anybody get me a toque? I want to get a toque for my girlfriend. And I piped up, like 12 beers deep, because they had given us a welcome bag. All of us had gotten this kind of gift bag, and it had mittens. It didn't have a toque, but it had Team Canada mittens in it. And I said, in my drunken enthusiasm, I'll give you the mittens. And Ruslan, my God, it was like, I just said I'd give him a kidney. Oh, my friend, I can't believe, it really was with the very formal stand up and a kiss you on both cheeks slowly 3 times. And I'm like, okay, I was all pumped up, like I was doing like Mother Teresa with the mittens. And I go staggering back to my room. I go rooting around in my stuff. I find the mittens. I come staggering back to the bar and I give him the mittens. And everybody at the table goes, yay! Like everybody's so excited. The mittens, of course, they're wrapped up in a packet, like they're vacuum sealed. Hand them the mittens, sit down, feeling very good about myself. And about 5 minutes later, Ruslan comes back, again, table's packed, taps me on the shoulder and says, this is not toque. And I said, yeah, I know it's not a toque. I said I didn't have a toque. It's mittens. He goes, but you don't have toque? And I said, no, I explained this to you. All I have is mittens. And he goes, oh, you keep these. There's total silence, total humiliated silence. And then Steve Simmons goes in that nasal whine of his. He goes, it's like he slapped you across the face.
Well, I can verify that story because I was sitting right there for the whole thing. What
And
a
the
beauty.
real kicker is that we continued to drink for about another hour. Then we got up and we left. And as I'm leaving, I hear footsteps behind me. It's Ruslan. Oh, I take mittens. He actually took the mittens.
Well, how about that? And Cathal and Greg, there's a very good chance that was one of the very beginnings of something called the wraparound, which we created in Sochi. And I knew it was going to get talked about at some time on this podcast. But for those who would be wondering what that might be, it meant basically staying up all night. Part of it was working, part of it was cooling off with a few beverages. And then when they brought out breakfast and served it, you stuck around and had that too.
Yeah.
And we've all been veterans of this occasion.
How many wraparounds did you do in Sochi?
All of them.
All of them. I can't beat that record. Yeah. Sochi was like it was a very strange and obviously fixed Olympics, but I had a ton of fun. I loved Sochi.
Well, we brought Greg in for the wraparounds in Pyeongchang because he wasn't available. He was up in the mountains when we were in Sochi.
That's right. You came in late. I remember you came for a final wraparound.
That's right. Yeah, much quieter existence up in the mountains. The bars actually shut down early, like 11 or 12. So it was I was on a regular sleep sets get that trip until I made it down for the final night. And that was a good one.
Did you stay over that night?
I did, yeah, because we had an early flight, early trip to the airport. I think we were catching a bus somewhere.
Did you
So
have
I
to
think
sleep on someone's floor or couch?
someone's couch. Yeah, I think
Oh
so.
God. And it was plastic wrapped, right? Remember all the furniture was wrapped in because it was becoming someone's apartment. All of
Yeah,
the places we stayed,
That's
like
right.
all of the
but it was,
appliances were wrapped in plastic. It was becoming someone's apartment as soon as we left. Yes,
That's
bizarre.
right.
That was a bizarre one. That was
Great
another good
trip.
one.
Great trip and great stories. Yeah. Thank you, Cathal. We
Yeah.
appreciate your time. And we'll do
Great
it
to see
again
you
down the
guys.
road.
See you at the
Thanks.
bar.
Yeah.
right on, buddy.
I'll show you around.
All right. Thanks to Cathal Kelly for a tremendous segment there. And now it's time, Ted, for some hot topics. And as always, the sports world delivering. There are some surprises, some interesting news developments in recent days. Let's start with the NHL. And as we record this today, just a few hours after Corey Perry signs with the Edmonton Oilers. What was your initial takeaways from that signing, Ted?
I saw a headline in one of the Edmonton papers that said, "The city of second chances." It used to be City of Champions. Well, they're going to go with this now because the Oilers first reclaimed Evander Kane after he was released and out on his cast aside by the San Jose Sharks after a whole lot of troubles there, followed by having troubles in Buffalo, and before that having troubles in Winnipeg. And the Oilers have turned him into a pretty big part of their team. And now it's going to be Corey Perry, who had a whole lot of trouble with the Chicago Blackhawks, so much so that he was released from the team. And I think it's a really interesting move. I'm not sure it's a great move. I don't like personally. I think there's a lot to be said for team culture, and when I watch championship teams, I think I see a certain team culture there that is very bonded, and it plays such a big role in the team winning. I'm not sure that bringing in guys that have character issues is the best idea, but the Oilers have won, 12 games in a row. It might be longer than that now. I can't remember where their streak is at. They're playing absolutely great hockey. They've got Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Their goaltender, Stuart Skinner's been playing great. Darnell Nurse and Matthias Ekholm on the blue line. Mentioned Kane already. Like, they're deep, and they've got a lot going on with Coach Chris Knobloch doing an excellent job since taking over. And I mean, I guess you can't argue that Corey Perry is a good player with a lot of playoff experience that can help them. I just wonder if it messes with their mojo at this point.
Yeah, always tough when you're riding a 12 or 13 game heater and you bring in a new player. Is that going to upset the dynamics? We'll find out. But I really like the signing, and I was surprised that it was the Oilers. I thought there would be a lot of interest in Perry, though, just given that he's such a winner. He's one of those guys who wins, and he's also very irritating if you're the other team in the playoffs. And I think a lot of NHL teams really need that guy who's willing and keen to just park in front of the net, take his shots, get under the other team's skin, deliver some clutch goals here and there, and just be that third, fourth line guy that is an irritant, but a successful one. I really like the move. I think the Oilers scored here big time.
And I can honestly, just to follow on that, it's interesting just from a Winnipeg perspective. The Jets played against the Ducks when Corey Perry was playing for them, and he drove them nuts. And the Jets got swept in that series. The Jets played against the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs in 2021. Corey Perry was a big part of that team for Montreal. The Jets got swept in the playoffs. Not saying the Edmonton Oilers are looking at that specifically, but you might remember what happened to a team that you could end up facing in the playoffs when that player was part of it. So in that sense, excellent move.
Okay, moving from player signing to NHL coaches, Ted. An interesting week with Patrick Waugh hired as coach of the New York Islanders. A lot of people wondering whether he can turn that team into a cup contender. And also, a lot of talk here in this market about the future of Toronto Maple Leafs coach Sheldon Keefe. Always in the midseason, an interesting time. Teams need to decide whether they want to make that change. The Isles say yes, the Leafs say no for now. What are your takeaways and what are your predictions here going forward?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know that there would be any connection between those two, Greg, but one thing you do know is when a team is considering making a move with a coach, they generally have someone in mind who they're going to replace him with, and you have to have a good person in mind to replace him with if you're even going to consider the move. So the Islanders went ahead and made sure they got a guy who was available, which was Patrick Waugh. I mean, he hasn't been wanted by that many teams, to be honest. He did coach in Colorado. He was in doing junior hockey for a long time, and now he's going to get a shot with the Islanders. And I think it's a very intriguing hire because I think as a short-term solution, he can really get a lot out of a team in a hurry. And the Islanders are much better than their record has shown to this point. They got great goaltending. They got balance all over that team. They should be not just a playoff team, but contending for the top spot in the division, and they haven't been. So I do think that is a move that could make real sense. As for the Leafs, they're so up and down, it's hard to tell. One day you think, yeah, Keefe's got to go. The next minute, well, no, they're not too bad. They're in third place in the division again. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Keefe's job is safe for now. I mean, the Leafs, yes, they have been inconsistent. They have had a lot of overtime / shootout losses, but I still think the core of that team is so strong that they will make the playoffs. Would I bet on them to go deep? Well, no, but they do have that potential. And I think Keefe has had such a strong regular season record. Losing 4 out of 5, 5 out of 6, or whatever it was, to me, doesn't raise the let's change the coach alarm any higher than what it already is. I think he's going to be the coach through the second half and into the playoffs. I think they'll stick with Keefe, and I think it's just a matter of a team that was in a bit of a slump.
Well, I can't help but wonder when you watch what happened with Edmonton, they were awful under Jay Woodcroft. They were just completely out of the thing, looking like they were going to have a lost season. They make a coaching change, and now they're just skyrocketing up the standings. And I don't think anybody would be shocked if they finished at or near first place and are big time contenders in the Stanley Cup. So you can't help but make that point that sometimes those coaching changes do that. You might think it's going pretty well or okay with Sheldon Keefe. You do have to bear in mind that perhaps it could be better. And another one I wanted to bring up about the Leafs was John Tavares. I mean, the guy's gone, and now this is just as of when we're recording, he had gone 8 games without a point. He's 33 years old. He's got $11 million contract. I mean, it's been suggested. I think Steve Simmons from the Toronto Sun actually suggested maybe maybe they need to ask him to waive his no trade clause so that they can somehow find a way to, get better. Maybe he's weighing them down a little bit. What's your thoughts on Johnny T?
Well, around 11 million a year. And what does he have, another year on his deal? I'd have to look. I don't have his contract deals in front of me, but that's a highly priced veteran forward. And I'm not so sure the appetite would be as strong for a player who makes that kind of money and is going to want to be, on the front top 2 lines. I don't know whether there'd be a lot of appetite around the league for a player like that, to be honest, who, appears to be on a bit of a decline. He had a great start to the season and looked like he was going to take this team to the next level, and it certainly tapered off over the mid-season here. Whether he can pick it up for the second half will be one of the more intriguing storylines, I think, for the Leaf Nation going forward.
How would anybody fit him in, right? That's the real hard part.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be difficult for any team, no doubt. I think he'll stay in Toronto, and I think this is their core, and they're gonna live or die by it. So we'll see what happens over the second half here. Let's transition, Teddy, to the NFL playoffs. Always an exciting time of year for football fans. What did you make of the divisional matchups here over the past weekend? I know we touched on some of the excitement in Orchard Park, New York, but some really intriguing storylines. And I think, yes, the Bills Mafia is a top storyline here in Southern Ontario, but I was really intrigued by the Detroit Lions' success. What did you make of the big playoff weekend?
Exactly what I was going to bring up. That atmosphere in Detroit was unbelievable. I never really have a horse in the race when it comes to the NFL. I like the sport. I'm in some fantasy leagues. I'm in some pools where I try to pick winners and that kind of thing. but I don't really usually attach myself to one horse in that league. And I got to tell you, I was cheering outright for the Detroit Lions. That was just so exciting to see for a team that's been downtrodden for so long. Don't know if I like their chances in San Francisco. The 49ers just look unbelievable. But, great to see a fan base have that opportunity to have this team going forward. And as I mentioned earlier, to see somehow that Patrick Mahomes has been in the league for 6 years and he's been in the AFC Championship every year. It's got to be one of the craziest stats I could even imagine. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And what a matchup that is going to be, where he goes with the Chiefs into Baltimore to take on Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, who have been absolutely outstanding this year. I really do think it's going to be a Ravens 49ers Super Bowl. I don't know. I think when you got Lamar Jackson in Baltimore and Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco, along with, of course, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, as the quarterback there, that's going to be a great game. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of these playoffs. I think it's going to be outstanding. What'd you make of it?
I have a soft spot for franchises that have gone years, in this case, decades, without that home playoff win. And it was just so great for the fan base. I loved it. I love watching the Detroit Lions. And yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm in now on watching that team, and I really hope they give the Niners a run for their money. We'll see what happens there. Let's talk a little curling, as we like to do, Ted. And there's obviously some interesting storylines as we come out of the Grand Slam of curling's latest event, the Co-op Canadian Open, and look ahead to many of the provincial championships coming up this week ahead of the Scotties Tournament of Hearts and the Montana's Brier. Are there some storylines in particular, Ted, that you're focused on here as we approach late January?
Well, I don't know how you couldn't be focused on Rachel Homan's team, which has now won 2 Grand Slams in a row, has narrowed the gap just a few points behind Silvana Tirinzoni of Switzerland for number 1 in the world, running away with it in the CTRS standings in Canada. I think this might just be the year that Carrie Anderson gets toppled as Canada's top team. Her team has won 4 years in a row. Rachel Homan has won championships before, but it's been a while. Her team just looks outstanding with Tracy Fleury at third, and Emma Miskew and Sarah Wilkes. Unbeatable to this point. We've seen teams do that in Grand Slam season and then not come through in the Scotties, but I really think that Homan has to be the team to beat there. And I do think that the one issue that they could have, I guess, is that when you don't get to play in your provincials, you miss out on a chance to really prepare for the Scotties. And so Homan and Jennifer Jones and Carrie Anderson won't play in their provincials this week, and they're going to go into the Scotties with rest, but not maybe not. Sometimes it'll take a little longer to get sharp once you get to the Scotties. What do you think, man? There's like 4 teams getting in now on wild cards, plus a defending champion on the women's side for the Scotties. It's getting less and less about the provincial championships, isn't it? And yet there's still some really interesting ones in Ontario, Alberta, Manitoba, and BC.
Yeah, I always follow the provincial playdowns with interest. It's always cool to see some of those teams. We saw it yesterday in Saskatchewan, where the young Ackerman squad delivered a win there, and they were just so excited in their early 20s. And you can really sense that provincial title, obviously in a curling mad province like that, they really, it's just a moment for them, something they've wanted to do for years. So I think it's great that the provincial still delivers that. But when it comes to the nationals, yeah, it's really interesting with the Scotties this year with that extra so-called wild card. I know they're not calling it wild card teams anymore. An interesting change. I don't know if you knew that, Teddy. Instead of Team Wildcard 2 and 3, they're going to be calling it Team Manitoba Jones, Team Ontario Homan, in addition to the provincial reps that will be coming in. So interesting wrinkle this year.
Thanks for giving me some news.
Yeah, just a little news. I had it tucked away in a towards the bottom of a story I wrote last week. I guess you don't read my stuff, but that's okay. It's neither here nor there. But it's I mean, Rachel Homan, obviously a great storyline this season, really seems settled in now. Fleury throwing third, Rachel throwing last rock, and a solid front end that's had a season and a half now, I guess, to really find its form. They're they appear to be the favorites, I would say, even though Carrie Anderson is the 4-time defending champ. They do seem like they're headed on a collision course, but there's going to be so many strong teams with Jennifer Jones, with those 2 wildcard entries. You're going to have strong CTRS representation. And then you've got teams like Krista McCarville, if she comes out of Northern Ontario. She may have already locked it up. I don't know. I don't have the Northern Ontario playdowns in front of me here, but that might be coming up this week. But I mean, so many solid teams like that. It's going to be an excellent event.
No doubt. And of course, on the men's side, Bruce Mowat wins the Grand Slam. It's been an all international season for Grand Slam winners, with Joel Returnaz of Italy winning the other ones. Canadian teams, Brendan Botcher's team's been outstanding. Brad Gushu as well. I don't think they're in major trouble there. But again, there's going to be that situation leading up to the Brier with some teams that aren't playing. And it'll be interesting to see how those provincial playdowns, just how exciting they are when you take some of the best teams out of the mix.
Yes, and I know we when we had our planning discussion, you mentioned that you wondered whether there should be a Grand Slam like second tier event added to the circuit, and obviously they do one of those tier 2 events on the series. But do you think, Ted, that there's a need, a desire to have even more curling at those competitions with the inclusion of a second tier?
Yeah, I just think the problem is there's a really big gap between the first tier, the real the Grand Slammers, the 6 teams. Let's say just on the men's side in particular, only 6 teams out of 16 get into the Grand Slam. There's a whole lot of other really good teams in Canada that are near that cusp, but they don't have those great places to play. They don't get to play against the international competition as much. They don't get to hone their skills in those really great situations like in arenas and whatnot. And I think there needs to be something for them, because otherwise there's just this huge gap between the absolute elites and the ones who are trying to reach that spot. How do those ones ever reach that spot if they don't have somewhere to graduate from? So I have talked to lots of curlers who would suggest that there should be something like that. I mean, you can't put it on the Grand Slam tour to do it. It might have to be something separate. They might incorporate some more things if they can to try to make it work. But, put a situation where somebody can win a tier 2 event and play their way in to the tier 1 events. There's secondary tours in golf, and curling has emulated golf for many years in terms of how it wants to have cash tours and playing for points and that kind of thing. And overall tours as opposed to just Canadian championships, or national championships, provincial championships. And so I could see something like that where you would have a secondary tour that kind of you can graduate from. There certainly seems to be an appetite for it with some of the curlers that I talk to.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm of the opinion that, yes, I think a second tier tour could work in theory, but I think it's more important to get that first tier tour really humming. And we've seen so many events dropped. We've seen so attendance at a lot of these events. And I think the bigger picture here is that curling has a real in-game entertainment problem when it comes to getting fans into the venues, getting people interested in the sport. And we know it's very popular among the 40 and up set. How do they make the sport more appealing for those under the age of 40? I think curling has a tremendous amount of potential. If they could ever figure that out, then I think you can get to the point where you add secondary tours and really make the sport hum. But I think there's a lot of work to be done. And as we've touched on in the past, Curling Canada's new CEO, Nolan Thiessen, I'm sure that's on his to-do list. Let's talk some Sports Illustrated, Ted. Sad news. I know we touched on it with Cathal. I used to be a subscriber back in the day. I can just picture the Hulk Hogan, maybe 1985 edition, where it was posed like this. And that was like a wow moment for me when that showed up in the mail. I was a huge pro wrestling guy growing up, and to see the Hulkster like that on the cover of SI, it really meant something. Did you have a favorite cover when you think back to your SI reading days?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I didn't think about that, so I'm not sure that I do have one that I can pull out like that. But I did have a large collection of them that started in my parents' house, and I took along with me on travels to become a journalist to Moose Jaw and Brandon and Winnipeg and whatnot. But I did end up putting them in some boxes and haven't looked at them for a while. And I did stop subscribing quite a few years ago. I guess it can't be too much of a surprise that a magazine, a physical magazine, is something that's going by the wayside. I mean, these are just like print newspapers and local news on television. They're things that are endangered because of the way the world is. But Sports Illustrated had created a brand as well online. And in fact, it had branched out a lot. And there was a curling section in Sports Illustrated. There's specific hockey writers and baseball writers and football writers and whatnot. And it looked a lot different from what it was way back when. So you assume that they were making a transition that was going to work. But it seems like with some questionable ownership and some questionable decisions, there was certainly an AI scandal that came out that many people talked about for a while before this happened. And then for them to, be going by the wayside, it seems to have laid off all their staff. It's just the end of an era. And I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not disappointed, because I am, but I'm not that surprised, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. It's sad to see that the news, of course, dozens of sports writers, just kind of blindsided by it. And it's interesting. I was listening to the Ringer podcast, the Press Box, earlier today, and the podcast host had written what he said was SI's obit on 3 different occasions, and now this appears to be the final one. But we'll have to wait and see what develops there. I understand there's still a slight chance they might reform or rebrand or do something, but sad news. Of course, a lot of sports fans love the old SI, the old hard copy, going way back, and all that great sports writing over the years. So sad news there. Let's pick it up a bit here, Ted, with the countdown clock to pitchers and catchers reporting. Let's see, it's January 22nd as we record, less than a month. February 15th, I believe, is the date, in Dunedin, Florida. The boys of summer are back. Not a lot of change when it comes to the Blue Jays offseason, and we've touched on some of the bigger moves in MLB in recent episodes here. But I know you bleed blue, Ted. What's your take on the Toronto Blue Jays offseason so far?
I don't know about that last part you just said, but I was an Expos fan growing up, actually. So I did follow the Jays, certainly when they won their World Series and things like that. But I don't know about the bleeding blue part. But I will say this: it seems like they were willing to swing for the fences. In terms of their pursuit of free agents, obviously with the Shohei Ohtani situation and whatnot, but it didn't work out. So it's looking like there's not going to be a whole lot of change. Like you said, they're probably going to have to rely on pitching and defense again. And that's not a terrible thing, because their rotation, I think, was ranked 3rd in the league last season, with guys like Kevin Gausman and Chris Bassett and Jose Barrios. I mean, if you're going to bring back most of that rotation and work with it again, you're going to have a chance. They made the playoffs last year. You're going to have a chance again. Are you going to be able to, are you making that huge splash, that huge marketing splash? Are you making that huge announcement? Here we are, we're the Blue Jays, we're going for it. Well, obviously not. But is there going to be enough talent there, certainly with some of those good hitters that they have, to have a successful season? I would certainly think so.
Yeah, they really need a left-handed DH, and I think they will sign one over the next few weeks. That's arguably the biggest area of concern right now, because yes, their pitching staff is really quite loaded. They were so healthy last year. That's going to be the big thing coming in. Can that starting 4 of the pitchers you mentioned, so you got Gausman, Bassett, Barrios, and Kikuchi, can they maintain their health and still deliver the 30-plus starts that they managed to do in 2023? If they do, I think the Jays will be right in the mix again, because, I mean, as they say, good pitching beats good hitting. But they need to see whether Alek Manoah can return to the starting rotation and be a quality starter the way he was in 2022 when he finished 3rd in the American League Cy Young Award voting. That's probably the biggest question mark heading into spring training. There was the reported signing of Yariel Rodriguez to a 4-year deal at 32 million in recent days. Now that's not official. It's just reports saying that he's going to be signing in Toronto. He pitched in Cuba and in Japan in recent years, pitched for Cuba at the World Baseball Classic last year, and by all accounts could be that depth guy that the Jays would need, kind of be in that 5th or 6th spot in the rotation, or could be slotted into what's already a pretty solid bullpen. So in addition to the Kevin Kiermaier signing, he'll be returning in center field. They picked up utility man Isaiah Kiner-Falefa as well. It's been rather quiet aside from those moves. So I would expect general manager Ross Atkins to be active over the next couple of weeks, and they need to start with that left-handed DH. And they might do something else too. We'll have to see. Hasn't ruled out trades, of course. So I think there will be some Blue Jays news over the coming weeks ahead of spring training.
All right, man. I'm rubbing my hands together here for those who are just listening and can't see it, because I think we're going to get that story now, aren't we? The one Cathal.
Let's do it. Yeah, the all-timers. Here we go. So 2018, yes, 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics in South Korea. Was stationed in the mountains like I was in Sochi. There's so many Canadians who do so well in the events that are located usually about an hour from the main hub where the hockey and the curling is usually going on. Up in the mountains, you get slope style, you get half pipe, you get, the skiing events, the luge, the bobsled, whatever it is. So I was up there and I was working a night shift. So I was on like, whatever, a 4 to 11 p.m. type gig. So I thought I'd get up, attack the day by going for a hike just across the road and up the mountain. So off I go. I got the tunes going, and I see some families out and about, and I'm like, this is great. Here we are. We're just loving the vibe in South Korea and trying to find some balance, as we often try to do at an Olympics, which are just a whirlwind. So I was enjoying the tunes, and I'm like 20 minutes into my hike, and I'm like, maybe I should turn around. I've kind of had enough. And I walk over this log, and I'm like, I'll just go up this little ridge here, and then I'll be good, and then I'll turn around another 50 yards or so. So I go up, and I'm looking at my my phone because I got the tunes going. I look down and then look up, and 3 fully kitted South Korean police officers, security officials, I don't know what, but they were ready to rock in their camo with machine pointed at me. And I'm like, what is going on? So I take off my headphones. I'm like, whoa, hey guys, how are you? What's going on? There's one guy's like, you shouldn't be here. I'm like, shouldn't be here. I'm just going for a hike. There's families around. What are you talking about? He's like, no, come with me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is not good. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I showed them my accreditation. I'm like, look, I'm here with the media, Canadian press. They're like, no, come with me. So we start walking down, and in my head, I'm like, okay, I got 8% juice on my phone. I'm up in the mountains where cell phone range is limited at best. Who am I going to call? What's the plan here? We get down about 15 minutes, and these guys, like I said, like, I don't know if you've ever had it pointed at you before, Ted. It is a trippy experience. Not to mention when there's 3 or 4 of them coming at like every direction, just like in the movies. It's like Rambo. Anyway, we walked down about 20 minutes, and I'm like, just sweating up a storm here. Like, what is going on? And why is this happening? It's so bizarre. Just out for a hike. And a new security guy comes up, and this guy is just in plain clothes, but you could just tell that he meant business, And I'm like, hey, how are you? He's like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, good. Yeah, just out for a hike. Got my cred here. Your friends here said I should head back to wherever I was down to the bottom of the hill. What's happening? What are we gonna do? And he said, yeah, come with me. And we go down these steps. We go down these steps, and finally towards the main parking lot. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna get some answers here now, finally. And these 3 like fully loaded SUVs with the black windows, the whole thing, pull up as this guy's walking me down. The guy's the full kit, and the machine went back at this point. They've handed me off. So I'm like, what's going on here, bud? I was just out for a hike. He says, well, you're not really supposed to be walking in that area. I know it wasn't blocked off, but you shouldn't have been there. But you're here to cover the Olympics, right? I'm like, yeah. okay, well, be on your way then. Have a good night. And I'm like, whoa, okay. And I went back to the media thing. Heart was pumping. Not quite sure why they needed to get the machine out, but that was the story from that day in South Korea.
Well, you are a very sinister looking guy. There's no doubt about it. And, I remember you telling me that story when we were there, and it's still a classic. I don't know how I follow that one up, to be honest. I mean, I got nothing compared to that, but I will tell one from the Olympics as well. This was from 2022 in Beijing. And I happened to be staying in the same hotel as Christine Brennan, who's an absolutely legendary journalist from the United States. She's on CNN a lot. She's really something. She covers all the big events, and the Olympics, of course, is one of the biggest ones. So I was just having my breakfast buffet. You had to sit at little tables that had plastic in between them. You weren't supposed to actually be able to talk to the person across from you because of possible germs and whatnot. And then so really, it was nothing to go up and sit with another person because you really weren't supposed to talk to them anyway. But as it happened, she was quite chatty. And so I introduced myself to her. She introduced herself to me. And I thought that was really cool, really neat to meet Christine Brennan. And she said, she started talking. She said she was from Toledo, Ohio. And I said, well, that's the home of Max Klinger from MASH. I am dating myself here, obviously. And she says, yeah, and he still lives there. And I'm like, well, but Klinger's just a character, right? So and she goes, yeah, but Jamie Farr is from Toledo as well. The guy who played him. She goes, he's a friend of mine. I'm going to phone him. So she dials up. He's about 90 years old, maybe 87 or something like that. She dials up. Jamie, there's a guy here. He's a fan of yours. Say hi. And I just couldn't believe that was my morning, just having my breakfast at the Beijing Olympics. But I sure appreciated it, and it was awfully kind of Christine, and really a story to remember for a long time.
That's great. I love it. That story's right up there, if not better than mine. I'm not a huge MASH guy. Were you a big MASH guy growing up?
I am a huge MASH guy. In fact, I've played a MASH trivia game, and nobody can beat me at it. It's my brothers think they're good, but no. And I've never lost a game of it in my life. So, because I watched it with my parents growing up, and then there was repeats on for years and years. I've seen every episode probably 20 times. And my brother just gave me for Christmas a series of books, like little paperbacks that are about MASH, but it's like MASH goes to London, MASH goes to Moscow, MASH goes to Vegas, and it's the original author of the book that spawned the movie, which ended up turning into the series, wrote these books to sort of capitalize on the success of what MASH was back in the 70s as a TV series. So I'm even going to read some of those while I'm sitting on the beach in Mexico, I think.
Well, I knew you're a big Sopranos guy, Ted, but I had no idea about MASH. Great stuff.
Pretty good at the Sopranos trivia too, I got to tell you.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the best shows of all time. When we first started talking about creating this pod, it was for stories like the ones we heard today. So thanks to you, and thanks to Cathal Kelly, the Globe and Mail, who simply delivered as our guest with some great stories, great insight in his time in the biz. I'd also like to give special thanks to producer Alex Antoniadis, the Toronto Metropolitan University Podcast Lab, and social media intern Ryan McMahon. Music by Tuesday Night Jam. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and hit that subscribe button when you listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Ted. A pleasure. Looking forward to episode 5.
And we'll see you from the beach next time.
Safe travels, buddy.